How many of you are chronically stressed? Well, unfortunately, that's most of us. Chronic stress can manifest in many different ways, including mental illness, so depression, anxiety, ADHD, chronic fatigue, sleep problems, relationship problems, chronic inflammation. There are many different ways that chronic stress can have symptoms. And so my guest today it just so happens to be my very first registered dietitian. I know I've had other nutritionists on the show before. I tend to lean more toward the holistic and the functional professionals, and quite frankly, in many cases, though those usually aren't registered dietitians. But my guest today she calls herself a functional dietitian. So this fits right in line with my philosophy and the purpose of today's show. Christa Biegler, RD, is an award-winning dietitian and root cause nutritionist. She's also the owner of Less Stressed Life Nutrition, and she helps people resolve food sensitivities, inflammation, and eczema without unnecessary restriction, endless supplementation, or costly testing. She lives with her unicycling husband and kids in the Midwest. By the way, Christa is also a podcast host. She hosts the podcast called Less Stressed Life, Helping You Heal Yourself. So definitely go check out her podcast, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. If you've been subscribed to my show for a while, you might have noticed I haven't published an episode in a few weeks. The reason for that is because I've decided to slow down on podcasting. I'm not quitting podcasting right now, but I have decided that it is a huge time suck, and quite honestly, this show has not been profitable. I do have a handful of listeners on pretty much every platform, but I did notice in the last 2 episodes that I published, I offered a free service to people, and I've had nobody contact me, which tells me that I do have an audience, but perhaps they're not local. But if you are a faithful listener and you're like, no, I really need to have weekly episodes, please let me know. Leave a comment on Spotify, or you could even send me a message at beavercreekwellness.com/contact. If I know that there's a demand for episodes, I will work to put them out. At least right now, though, I do plan on at least having an episode once per month, maybe even on a bi-weekly basis. We'll just kind of see how things go, but my goal is to have at least a monthly episode to keep the podcast active. Welcome to the Real Food Mental Health Podcast, where we explore the powerful connection between mental and physical health. My name is Cody Cox, a holistic nutritional psychotherapist, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to true wellness, mind, body, and spirit. If you're tired of quick fixes and want real solutions that address the root cause, you're in the right place. Let's get started on your path to lasting wellness. So Christa, tell me a little bit about your background. How long have you been a dietitian?
I think I've been a dietitian for a little over 10 years at this point. I worked in a lot of contract positions the first 5 to 8 years probably, and then there was some overlap before I started private practice, and then I stopped doing any other contract work in probably 2018. I've been in private practice since probably 2015. I am a questioner and a very curious person, so private practice and kind of doing my own thing made more sense to me because I was able to be more agile, you might say.
Have you
and be
read
able to implement things.
the 4 tendencies?
I don't know. Is this
I can't remember who the author is, but when you said that you're a questioner, so one of the tendencies is a
Is it Gretchen
questioner.
Rubin? Yeah.
Yeah, Gretchen Rubin. Yeah.
So I haven't read the 4 tendencies. I just know that I'm a questioner. And yes, I do remember hinging off of that. And sometimes I love personality type things because I think that they offer empathy and they can sometimes be revealing a little bit as well. But yes, that's where that originally came from, but I haven't read the book now that you say that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also a questioner, which is why I do what I do. I'm not your average therapist, but I'm curious, what made you want to become a dietitian in the first place?
I mean, that goes way back. In early school, like in high school, I was very interested. I was doing some presentations about what doesn't seem very interesting to me now, fast food and soda. And I was like, this is fascinating. Everyone should know this. And so I went to school actually for journalism and nutrition. And I always really enjoyed both. And I grew up probably with kind of a crunchy mother. My mom always opened the homeopathy kit before ever taking us to a doctor. And so I think I thought I would get more of that in school. I got basically zero of that, but I still thoroughly enjoyed my career and degree. It's just that I don't know if this is the case. I assume this is the case in most degrees. You only use so much of what you went to school for, right? Like there's a lot of anatomy and physiology, and I certainly rely a ton on physiology now in my job. You know, sometimes some of the concepts we're talking about, someone might say, show me a study. And it's like, this is basic physiology, right? But we're not really taught how to use our bodies. And so, speaking of personality types, I'm a really results oriented, focused person as well. And so I think all of those things are kind of stack how you end up operating in real life. So I've always just genuinely enjoyed food, enjoyed nutrition. I love food. I will tell you that about half the people that are in my profession actually have a disordered eating history. And that's is neither here nor there. I think that there's some interesting stats like that in your profession too.
Yeah, I think most therapists have a history with mental illness. And I mean, we don't make very much money, so we don't become therapists to make money. We're doing it to help people like us,
Yeah,
which is kind of a special thing.
yeah.
But the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because I think there's definitely a biological component to mental illness that is often ignored.
Oh, totally. Totally. I was just talking to you offline about James Greenblatt, and I think about sometimes a concept, speaking of mental illness, that is it's kind of a sad one to me, is mourning people who are still alive. So I have a brother who, what I would say was a victim of mental illness. He did drugs too early. And so he's not, it's like mourning a person who's still alive. And so I was talking to you offline about Dr. James Greenblatt's work about certain nutrient deficiencies in different places. And so my point is like my heart goes out to, there's so much, if we would work together better, if we put the whole health triad together more often, right? The nutritional chemical angle, right? The emotional energetic angle and the structural angle, we would be probably a lot farther along than we are in our respective fields in general. And so one of the reasons I'm in private practice is I get to pull things together, because I think being a questioner means you just don't like to settle for superficial answers around things. You're like, there's got to be more options. And one of my isms is that you always have options. I just don't believe that you're ever out of options to feel better or feel your best or improve something or improve a symptom in general. And so, yeah, I get it. And so I guess the point is about half the people in my profession have disordered eating history, right? Which is a technique, I would say like has a mental health component. I did not. I just loved food. And it's all good either way. It's all good either way. But I mentioned to you before we hit record that when I started working with gut health issues and inflammation, et cetera, I was completely unprepared 10 years ago for the amount of anxiety that I was walking into, right? Seeing people for fibromyalgia, the amount of depression that I was into. Not that I do a lot of fibromyalgia specifically, but it's just that there's such an intertwine and these things have to be put together. And I would say generally most health practitioners have near zero mental health education or ability to kind of help people feel seen, heard, etc. And in general, just like not much respect to bedside manner, if you might say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of people who have trauma from literally going to their providers. And usually those people end up in my office because usually I usually don't get people at the beginning. I get them in the middle or later part of their journey, right? After they've seen many other people in general. And so there's often there can be a wall, right? That's there where people have worked with someone else or had a bad experience. But I just want to bring, I'm going through Dr. Peter Levine's book right now about all of
Oh
these
yeah.
micro traumas, right? About like how very commonly just medical exposure is a trauma. And so I think it's good to mention that we need more interplay of these two things, and respectively, there's not a lot of overlap, unfortunately. I mean, and I think we can just have a team approach. I was interviewing an oncologist last week, and he said, your team should be and he was a naturopathic oncologist, so cancer doctor, right? He said you should have your primary oncologist for your treatment, and maybe your naturopathic physician and your mental health provider, right? Because your mental health is going to pretty much depict whether you sink or swim in that cancer journey. So
Yeah, there's really a lot that we could unpack here. So, and we were kind of talking about this before we started recording too. All the different angles that we could take with this episode between just food and mental health in general. But the one of the main ones that I'd like to cover today is chronic stress. So, like, I know chronic stress is everybody's got it to some level, right?
yeah.
And I know that you typically are interested more in like the high achiever type personalities, but I'm seeing it in the low achievers too, and sometimes that's me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But what do you typically see as far as the chronic stress goes? Like what symptoms are coming from that? Like what are the first signs that you see from somebody who might be suffering in that way?
Well, I think this is a really good question. I usually see it when it gets a little more downstream, so I'll be able to speak to that a lot more clearly. But you're right. Chronic stress, I think, is a huge issue. And I think for me, the concept is unconscious stress. It's the stress we don't really realize we have. And I think an example of this that rings very true was I was talking about this with my team just an hour ago, and helping, how do we help people who walk in the door, connect them to the right neuroplasticity or nervous system support so that they can communicate to their immune system safety? Because the reality is that stress chemistry is about half of the conversation of like inflammation and immune system. Your stress, or how your body is reading stress, thoughts communicating to the rest of your body, is sending biochemical signals through and impacting it the same as whether you have a gut infection or you have a brain concussion or something else. It's as equal or even more. So one of the fastest things you can do to reduce inflammation in general is to communicate safety to the body through the nervous system overall. So anyway, I was asking our team, how do we help someone realize where they are and even take an assessment in general? And I think one of the questions we were coming up with was, when did you first start putting everybody else in front of yourself? When did you first start to feel overwhelmed? Right. And so a very common, there's different times of life that can feel stressful, and you just have to keep going, and it becomes your norm to where you sort of shut off the feelings and the sensations overall. So some examples of stress that you may not feel like stress but are read by the body as stress is multitasking, eating while you're working, eating on the go. And I'm not saying like anyone is perfect. Life is full. Life is very abundant. I'm just talking about what actually then happens next overall. But some periods of life where overwhelm can start and then become sort of the baseline is any new parent, right? You wake up and you start reacting to other people. And so your sleep is disrupted. You're reacting to this little human that you love very much, right? But you are like constantly in this reactionary mode. And to me, stress is in general very reactionary, or like reactions, or feeling like you want to, react to someone in a way that you don't love. All of that is a byproduct of stress overall. And so what does that happen? So what happens for me is what happens in your body biochemically. Well, this starts to compound over and over and over. And so there's a few key places that stress will start to compound and create biological change, biochemical change in the body. And if you don't mind, I'll share a few of those.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when stress, if we just think about like how stress is being read by the body, and I have a lot of thoughts about like head to the, like your thoughts start to control this entire cascade in general. But in general, we are most familiar with a stress hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol has been having a heyday on the internet. It's bringing a little more awareness to it, but I'd like to improve the awareness right now. Cortisol is essential. You must have it. It affects the energy you have when you wake up in the morning. So basic physiology, first of all, I suppose, before we talk about some of the downstream effects will be helpful. So when you wake up, your brain, your skin, when it gets exposed to full spectrum light through the sun, or if you have a light or an alarm clock that's full spectrum light, when that full spectrum light hits your suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain, it starts to tell your brain it's daytime, it's time to wake up, it's time to make hormones through the day. So you should feel your highest energy technically 30 to 60 minutes after rising, but it's triggered by that full spectrum light. So if we grab our phone right away, some resources say like that's telling your brain it's noon. There's some hacks for that, right? We can turn the phone screen gray or red and block some of that blue light that will often destroy hormone production right out the outset. But what should happen is when you wake up 30 to 60 minutes later, you should feel like at your peak energy for the day. That's called your cortisol awakening response. And after that, it should go down in this nice little sort of curve. So it's sort of, you wake up and then it peaks after you wake up, and then it goes down in the afternoon. It doesn't plummet in the afternoon, it goes down. So you shouldn't be plummeting. And then it should be at its lowest right before bed. So there's all kinds of scenarios that people run into being wired and tired. Typically, this has started as well-intentioned lifestyle things. When you trigger cortisol, you do something stressful before bed, you start to pay bills, you feel like you have to clean the kitchen, and it feels like this stressful thing. We're triggering cortisol. And once cortisol goes up, it usually takes about 90 minutes for it to come back down. So if you start to do something sort of stressful instead of something relaxing, the hour and a half before bed, you're going to maybe trigger cortisol, and then it's going to take some time to come back down. That might feel like being wired and tired. The other way to think about cortisol is I like to think about stepping on a gas pedal. And so when we've all had experience of speeding typically. And so when you're speeding or pressing on the gas pedal beyond the speed limit, we use more gasoline, we use more fuel, we use more energy. It's the same with the body. When we are pushing on cortisol really routinely, like we're running from appointment to appointment to appointment without much margin between, or going from thing to thing to thing without kind of decompressing between, or switching out of this activation mode, we're just kind of speeding ongoing. So we're burning through a lot of energy. And so specifically what happens is you will deplete many, many, many nutrients, specifically minerals. And so back to the gasoline or the gas pedal analogy, when we're speeding, we use up more energy and we use up gas faster. And when we run out of, so that's being really high cortisol state. And then what happens is after we run like this for a while, which is very common, our body, it runs out of gas and we go to the reserve tank. And a lot of humans, a lot of us are running on a reserve tank. And this starts to look like hormone imbalance. Many other things as well, but it definitely looks like some version of hormone imbalance, which we can talk about what that looks like. But essentially when you're running on the reserve tank, what has happened is there's been a bit of damage done. You depleted a lot of nutrients. It's not something that you can't resolve because your body is incredibly resilient. Technically, you can absolutely heal from it. So don't be worried about that. It's knowing first. I think the knowing and the initial assessment is actually the biggest issue. I think people run around in reactive mode, and usually all the people around you know it more than you do. That's the tricky part. Is like when a client walks in the door and she is just living in reaction mode and she's kind of all over the place, like you hear it in her voice. You see it in her face. It's real obvious to us. For me, it used to look like talking really fast. And if you think I'm talking fast now, you should have met me before. I grew up in a family of fast talking women. And so that was my baseline of speeding all the time. My heart rate was increased. So my cortisol was very increased. I was very excited to talk to my clients, to share a lot of things with them, to help them with things. But I was always trying to fit, 100 pounds of stuff into a 50-pound bag all the time. And so for me, talking really fast, someone asked me not very long ago, she said, "What's your favorite nervous system tool?" And I said, observing my rate of speech, which affects my heart rate, which affects my cortisol. So just making sure we're hammering this initial concept home, pressing on the gas pedal, speeding through life, depleting lots of nutrients. And here's the bottom line, like everything in your body is run on nutrients. So if you're depleted in nutrients at any capacity, then your body's got to shut down some production. It's like being overworked and understaffed of all the machines in your body. And so that's the case for all of these organ systems. And they're all crazy enough connected, right? They're very much connected. And so And the challenge here is, and what I'm explaining to you, I feel so passionately about because there's so much you can do to feel better around it. But the only bad part is that if you show up to your provider, they will not have many tools for you. Unfortunately, conventionally, you have to almost be dead before we find anything wrong on labs. There are lab options. One of the labs your provider could run that's going to show you a severe issue with this is DHEA, because one of the other hormones produced by the adrenals. So the cortisol is produced by the adrenals. And I mentioned before, it's essential. So your body is going to produce that before anything else, which means your body's going to downregulate estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So no libido, might have period issue, like anything is on the table there, right? Might have crappy energy, crappy periods, all kinds of things. You might your body's going to slow down thyroid production. It may or may not show up on blood labs. Blood labs aren't the best indicator if your thyroid is tip-top shape. And if that's an issue, it might look like anxiety. It might look like depression. It might look like a squirrel brain. It might look like ADHD, in my opinion. It might look like dry skin, dry hair. It might look like slow motility. It might look like cold hands and feet, losing hair. Very, very, very common for all that to show up long before blood labs are off. And the point is that, yeah, if your cortisol is like if your body has this essential hormone it must produce and it's running from a tiger all the time, then it's going to downregulate everything else, including your digestion, including, so that impacts how you digest and absorb nutrients. But so the bottom line is, unfortunately, we don't have incredible testing for this conventionally. And so if you go to, I would say, don't blame your provider. Their adrenals are not in good shape either, most likely. I've seen their medical curriculum and how they train doctors. They are not very good to the stress system. So in general, understanding this in general, seeing what these symptoms start to look like, and the symptoms of the adrenals starting to run on the reserve tank usually look like normal to low blood pressure. So you'll get applauded at the doctor because your blood pressure is not high, but it's actually a bit low. And so in severe cases, you can be a little lightheaded from sitting to standing, lying down to sitting up. Craving salt is really common. Just feeling exhausted, especially if you increase cardio, you might feel like you need a nap on the weekends. Those are usually all symptoms of pretty significant living on a reserve tank overall. Because again, if your body cannot produce this one hormone at the proper intervals it should, it's going to do whatever it can. It's going to grab from all of the resources to create that before it does any other hormone production. So it starts to spiral into lots of issues. And this is a pretty important topic, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, see, most therapists would be quick to label like personality disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and I mean, it is within our right to diagnose people with these things, but we're missing all of the physiological stuff that you just described. This is so important. It's like I was saying earlier, I have so many clients who I feel like are kind of in this state where it's like I can do EMDR and other trauma type therapies, but I can only get so far if they're not addressing the physiological stuff. Mm-hmm. So whether it's the adrenal fatigue, the thyroid hypofunction, just a whacked out circadian rhythm, there's all this stuff that really is driving mental illness, in my opinion. But I mean, I think a lot of people are getting this way, especially in the last few years. What are your thoughts on like what might be causing that? Like what creates this chronic stress that so many people are dealing with?
I think it comes from so many places. And I think if we want to so I can talk about it big picture, but I'd also like to talk about it from a perspective of what can someone do right now and assess their own life as well. So first of all, if we back up big picture, where are we getting these stresses? I have 100% noticed a shift in humans in the last 5 years, right? There was, extreme fear. I'll call it fear mongering over the last 5 years. There's been such a chasm, right, in humanity over the last 5 years as well, right? And so all of that being compounded, I would say that the inflammatory stress that COVID even had in general was the straw that broke the back of a lot of people. And I'll give you some tangible examples. So operating out of the premise that nutrients make all the magic happen in the body. So imagine there's lots of machines happening, all these organ systems. Nutrients are the workers that show up. But stress in general is declining all of those nutrients. So then you're going to have a decline of how all of those systems are showing up in general. So what I see is that very commonly, someone will be kind of getting by. Like things are okay. They're not like in severe distress. They're like, I can handle this. This is okay. I'm at my threshold and it's fine. So I'm like getting by with sort of annoying symptoms maybe, but it's not the end of the world. And then I go through a period of chronic stress. And I consider chronic stress anything that's a month or more, essentially, right? That's how I learned it in allopathic training. And like anything over a month is usually chronic. Some people say over 3 months, whatever. My point is that essentially under this period of chronic stress, we already just learned and realized that the higher the stress, the more depletion occurs. The other side note real quick about stress is that when stress is up or when our nervous system is really activated, we're not digesting well. So digestion in general gets shut down. And so you can imagine when you're not digesting well, things happen. Sometimes food sensitivities occur. We're not absorbing nutrients well. So not only are we depleting nutrients from the high stress, we're also not digesting, absorbing the food coming in necessarily, which causes another cascade of issues that might look like gut issues, essentially, or food sensitivities, or honestly, a plethora. Could be anything. Could be anything. And so my point is you can be getting by with a little bit of overworking and understaff, but then the boss, which is you, which is me, right, dumps on a whole nother caseload, right? So now we've got double the caseload. Like now you're dealing with a sick parent, something going on with your child. Maybe your spouse got COVID. Maybe you had a work situation, like whatever it was, you were stressed for more than a month. It could have been all kinds of things, right? So you're stressed for more than a month and now you've really depleted nutrients. Now you're really not absorbing well. And I see that tends to make things fall apart. Like maybe you were getting by, but then suddenly you are not anymore. And of course, this might look like, for me, I see a lot of skin issues. So I see a lot of reactivation of old viruses, mold suddenly becoming a problem. Like people get hand eczema. I deal with a ton of hand eczema, which is usually stress mediated and triggered. Autoimmunity, I don't know about you, but I never see a case of autoimmunity that didn't have a stress trigger preceding it right before the diagnosis, typically. And we might even be able to say the same about cancer now. Cancer is currently 1 and 2, which I have an unusual interest in. And there's such an overlap between autoimmunity sometimes and cancer. Not saying like you have one and you get the other. I don't want to say that. I just mean like, hey, when we have these stress activations, essentially, it's changing the pathology of the cell in general. And so anyway, you asked me about what do I think is going on? In the last 5 years, I've seen an increase in this. I think that the inflammation that COVID brought into the body, plus it was I don't know about you, but like there was such a stress in the air forever.
Oh, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So that alone, like the presence of that, unless you basically crawled into a hole and ignored most of society, you were kind of like absorbing the stress typically, in some capacity or another. And so it's not your fault. I'm not saying that. It's just that there's been a shift in humanity. And what I see is more hypersensitivity, more reactivity in general, which, by the way, absolutely is related to this adrenal function issue. Like when hypersensitivity is happening, meaning it feels like I'm reacting to all kinds of things, your adrenals always want to be helped. they're like, I'm over here screaming, but you don't know yet, that this is part of the issue. So that's one, obvious thing. There are some other like assaults to our systems that are kind of a bummer. Potentially light exposure. So we actually kind of touched on this very lightly already, right? When you wake up, your hormones for the day are being triggered by light exposure. And for all the people that are like, oh, I get my light exposure on the drive to work, or I look out a window. I'm like, cute. But all of the windows have energy efficiency now. So they're actually filtering some of the wavelengths of light. So you got to crack the window. Sorry. And it works. It'll filter through the clouds. Nature's cooler than us. It'll do a better job filtering through the clouds. It can be cloudy and you can go out and like look at the sun that's behind the clouds and you'll get more full spectrum light than behind the windows. And so this is just a little hack, no problem. Just like crack the window, know better, do better. But so we have this other scenario where we're essentially phasing out incandescent bulbs. And now we've got all these LED lights, and they've got all these micro flickers that can essentially destroy melatonin. They're associated with like all of these insane health outcomes, negative health outcomes, from eye decline to all kinds of things like that. I'm not actually, I can't cite all the research. You can look it up. It's unfortunate. So we got that kind of going on for us, right? Like all of this light around us. And I think there's things we can do for sure. We don't have to be crazy about it, but it's just that when the system is stressed, little additional stressors seem to matter. And I don't know what percentage of your clients that you see have sleep issues, but has to be one of the first conversations being had when there's sleep issues. The more severe the sleep issues, the more important some of these circadian rhythm things are, I would say. Like more, you'll get a bigger bang for your buck overall with these circadian rhythm inputs than if things are not severe. So it's more noticeable. For someone who, they don't have issues with sleep in general, they may not notice it as much, but I still want to take a decent, I still want to do something related to it. So for example, we're talking in November, in these shortest days of the year. As soon as we got on, I was kind of complaining. I was like, oh, it's dark already, Cody. Makes me sad, but I've got this, full spectrum light on the desk, and I should not have it on at this time anymore. But here we are trying to be illuminated. I should have an amber light technically, but this lamp right here, it's a full spectrum light. And if you leave it on your desk the first half of the day, it can be very helpful for improving energy. And I've learned this lesson too many times, that when it's cloudy for multiple days in a row, of course it impacts your energy and your mood. It's just a little thing. I always kind of do this PSA to clients. I say, it's time to get your full spectrum lights out of the closet. It's November, December, January. It's these darker seasons by putting this full spectrum light. Sometimes you have to hack the fact that there's not a lot of sunlight. I know that people have real issues where they're driving to work in the dark, et cetera. And there's little things we can do for it, right? And you can even kind of double it up. There's alarm clocks that are full spectrum lights that will light up and act like the sun as well. So those can be little things, but circadian rhythm. So when you ask, like, what are the issues? I think it's so multifaceted, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, what can we do to remove the stresses? What's in our control? There's a lot of things that aren't in our control, or we don't have the capacity for. I think capacity is one of the most important words I like to consider. What do I have the capacity for right now? And I'll do what I want to do. And I have an exercise for this. This is my favorite applicable exercise. I love having people just draw a line down the middle of the page and them putting on a song and just writing down, like, what is zapping my energy, and like, what's my vampire and like sucking all the joy out of my life. And on the other side of the page, it's, what brings joy to my life. And that really long page of energy sucking things is why capacity feels low, typically, why the battery feels, empty, etc. So I love to do that exercise, because until we assess and have some awareness about where we are, we just keep hanging out on that hamster wheel. And when we're hanging out on the hamster wheel, it feels like unconscious stress that we don't feel like we can do something about.
It can be super hard to get clients motivated. So I was mentioning how I've got a lot of clients who, like, I feel like they're chronically stressed. It's hard to get them to take the smallest steps toward progress. So do you have any other steps that you would recommend as far as like getting people going? So circadian rhythm, that's something I talk about a lot, but I work with a lot of college students, and that can be a really difficult thing to say, go to bed on time.
Yeah. So the good news is the research is that in your 20s, you tend to have more resilience around circadian rhythm stuff, which is nice. I think the thing is knowing, just a couple of quick notes on circadian rhythm. It's like, could you actually turn your phone screen or your computer screen and put filters on them, right? Like, what are simple things you can do that you don't have to start to think about that become automatic overall? So when we're talking about adrenals and the adrenals struggling in general, we talk about little things that are supportive. One, it's noticing where you are. I always think awareness is the first thing, but if we're talking about like physiological things to kind of put the pieces back together, there are options for the adrenals. And I divide it into two parts. what can I do to add in shortcuts to love on the adrenals, and what can I do lifestyle wise? And what I want to remind you of is that you cannot out supplement or out hack a lifestyle in general. So we kind of have to always evaluate, am I chronically undersleeping? Am I chronically undernourishing and over exercising, which is pretty common for really health conscious people. They can be doing a bunch of running or something and just not nourishing very well. That's pretty tough on the adrenals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bunch of lifestyle things for sure. From the shortcuts perspective, and what I'll say is, and I say this often, is that your body is so resilient that if you slept more hours, or like if your body says like, no more, I'm hitting a wall, and it's like literally makes you sleep more, it's usually doing that because it's like literally a survival mechanism. And so typically when we're healing the adrenals, the hard stop on sleep is like, you got to get 7 to 10 hours of sleep as if you can, right? Like there's some factors there, of course, there's individual context, but 7 to 10 hours of sleep. And I always say like, you can go ahead and take naps every day, and that will start to help you heal your adrenals. Doing breath work that you can find online an oxygenated environment can increase ATP production efficiency by like 15 times. There's all these like really cool things you can do that are actually free. And then there's also some other shortcuts. For example, one of the reasons that when your adrenals are off, they crave salt is because adrenals need, and like every enzyme process needs minerals. And so starting your day with electrolytes, not a super carb-filled electrolyte like liquid IV, but a super mineral-dense electrolyte. So that looks like something like sea salt and aloe vera juice, like that's the homemade version, or coconut water. You can get all kinds of different ones. I'm looking for sodium, potassium, magnesium. 200 milligrams or less is pretty pathetic. I'd love to get a lot more than that. Like if you tolerate milk, it's actually a great electrolyte, by the way, full of protein and potassium. And I mean, I don't care, neither here nor there if you can tolerate milk, but I'm just saying, since we're talking about college students, it's like you can home make an electrolyte product, or you can buy one, but just don't go buy crappy ones, which is usually what's on the shelf at Walmart. So look for more than 200 milligrams of sodium, potassium, magnesium, typically. If you can only get more than 200 milligrams of 2 of those, always pick your sodium, potassium, technically, for your adrenals. I know that's like under recognized. It's because those are the doorway into the cell. You got to get the doorway going before you have a bouncer outside, which is magnesium. So lots of electrolytes. So I always say like, I'm habit stacking in the morning. So like the first thing I do is get up and have electrolytes and look at the sun. And those 2 things alone, when you're hitting the right things, will start to shift your energy. Just that alone. From there, I like to do specific adrenal support, mitochondrial support, maybe adrenal glandular, et cetera. All of those are shortcuts. Because remember that the chronic stress is cellular degradation. It's damage to the cells. And so you're basically trying to heal the cells. So there's all these mechanisms your body has to heal cells, right? That look like a lot of sleep, typically, like really good breath, like addressing the things that are killing the cells, try to stop killing the cells as much as possible, whenever possible. There are things like mold exposure, which are really common in college homes too, that are really flatlining that really damage cellular function. I deal with that a ton. So I just want to mention it. I don't say it to be weird or crazy. It's just, I think if we can learn skills and be aware of more things, we can actually prevent more things or catch things earlier, especially when we get gaslighted, because unfortunately, conventionally, also really poorly recognized, but very, very common, unfortunately. Usually looks like having fungal overgrowth symptoms, but it can also just look like Hashimoto's or all kinds of things. So anyway, so there's some shortcuts to help your adrenals heal faster, and a really normal timeline. If you were doing all of the things, 4 to 6 months. If you are taking an extra nap, 6 to 12 months, maybe, throughout the day. So those are some real tangible things, but I think waking up and nourishing with more minerals and electrolyte products and just doing it in your water throughout the day is sort of like, again, we're looking for easy things that feel kind of easy in general. So like coconut water is insanely rich in potassium, and you can add some mineral salt. I know that your dorms don't necessarily have, your mess halls don't necessarily have a mineral salt, but you can get high quality mineral salt for $10. Cody over here is in Utah. And if you're in Utah, the mineral salt's down the road from you guys, the US mineral salt, right? We have our own mineral salt out of Utah. It's like $10. So it's not crazy, and you get really rich minerals. You can also bathe in your minerals, right? You can take Epsom salt bath. So if you're in college, you probably don't have a bath, but you've got hot springs, and things as well, like where you live. And so those can be actually kind of incredible for a topical mineral absorption as well. So just thinking of like sometimes, it's fun to be asked something like, well, what's some out of the box things? What's free? Maybe take an early trip up to Fifth Water Hot Springs. That's
Yeah,
right.
I didn't. For some reason, I never thought to talk about hot springs with people, but that's a
I
good
know.
point. We do have hot springs pretty close to where I am, to the north and to the west.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the ones in northern Utah, I'm pretty close to Idaho. The ones that are in my area are commercialized and they're not exactly free, but they're
Mhm.
still cheap, and a lot of college students go there. Like, I mean, it's totally a college student thing.
Yeah.
And so, definitely something I'm going to start recommending from now on.
Yeah.
So we talked about adrenal health. What about thyroid? So I know a lot of therapists understand that if you've got thyroid problems, most likely that's going to cause depression or symptoms of depression. But from what you were telling me before we started recording, there are actually a lot of the tests that we normally run for thyroid are inadequate. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So if you go in and you ask your provider to test your thyroid, usually the first thing that they will run is not a thyroid test. This is kind of crazy, right? It's a thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. It's kind of like an alarm clock to start to tell the rest of the body it's time to produce thyroid hormone overall. If you're lucky, they might also run T4. That's inactive thyroid hormone, but that's usually where it will stop. I don't care what you ask for. That's typically the full stop. And that's partially because that's what's covered by the insurance. Sometimes I would guess that you might be more benefited to go self-pay and to buy a full thyroid panel than to get it done at the provider's office if there's insurance issues, because I've seen insurance is like crazy. I've seen insurance charge $2,000 to the insurance. I've seen essentially like a $2,000 lab test that really should have cost $20. Like that's kind of like the crazy difference we'll sometimes see with some of this stuff. So my point is that your provider is probably not going to order you something that you would get charged a lot of money for, right? So that's usually why they're not ordering it, because the insurance will not cover it, possibly.
Mm.
But you can go get a full thyroid panel from sites like Request a Test. Usually if you're ordering as a consumer, it's like more like $100. But this is all education, first of all. I'm about to tell you, like, you don't necessarily need to go this route. My point is that this is what the testing landscape is like, for good, for better, or for worse. It's not very good. My experience is that usually your thyroid blood labs are not off until things are a complete hot mess. And usually you can start supporting your thyroid long before that. So first things first, if your adrenals are on reserve mode, that's first, to be honest. Like your thyroid is not really going to care. But from there, your thyroid loves a lot of nutrients as well. So just as a reminder, some of the first thing I'd have you do, and there are some other testing options. There's a test called hair tissue mineral analysis. It's fairly uncommon. It's kind of a whole niche part of the internet. It's a very good subclinical tissue test, looking at mineral ratios that kind of tells you that thyroid is sluggish. I thought it was pretty hokey, but it's actually quite life-changing. But again, you don't necessarily need that either. You just need to say yes to several symptoms of thyroid. So let me run through the symptoms of sluggish thyroid because they're extremely common. We talked about anxiety or depression, joint pain or muscle aches, like legs can feel heavy, having a predisposition to fungal symptoms like white-coated tongue, even having some vaginal infections, athlete's foot, toenail fungus. And the reason for this is when your thyroid is sluggish, your basal body temperature is just slightly lower, and that allows fungus to sort of thrive or overgrow in places where it may not otherwise. Dry hair, dry skin, trouble gaining or losing weight, trouble sleeping. Sounds like a lot of people, right? Fatigue, low pulse, maybe thinning on the losing hair, thinning hair, or like thinning of your eyebrows, even feeling cold, like hands, feet. I would say that sometimes the people whose labs actually show up off, that's their whole body feels cold. We already talked about tendency for dry skin, dry scalp, cracked feet, need for coffee to have a bowel movement. That's a sneaky one. And then one of my favorite ones is brain fog or like trouble focusing or having like a squirrel brain or ADHD. So you might have been like, oh, I have a few of those. My thing is that is understanding how symptoms relate to systems. And when you can relate symptoms to a system, you can start to support that system. And
Right.
all of these systems are very nutrient dependent. There's a lot we can do to support them. You don't need to take a whack-a-mole approach. You don't need to be like, oh, I read that zinc was good. I read that selenium is good. Try to take a food-based approach first because there's a lot of synergy to nutrients overall. Or take a synergistic blend of something. But things that support the thyroid, there's a lot of things, but things that impair thyroid function, especially if I'm thinking about college students, things that impair thyroid function would be any endocrine disruptors. And so that can be stuff in your water or like heating up plastics. That's just not necessary. Food could possibly be stored in plastics. That's fine. Like we can get things in plastics, but don't be popping that plastic in the microwave. Put it on a plate and then warm
Right.
it up. Such a simple thing that does technically impact your entire endocrine system. And it's like you could be doing all the right things, but when we're dumping plastics into our system, it sort of does impair the overall function of that. And so it's just, it's sort of basics, but it's sort of like easy to accidentally do at the same time, right? It's like, oh, I didn't know that heating plastic was actually atrocious for my health, but we actually get a ton of microplastics that way. And it's not
What I see a
fear-mongering.
lot too is a lot of people will use plastic utensils like a plastic spatula, and they don't realize it's kind of the same thing. You might as
Yeah.
well just cut that
You
out
want,
and trade it out
yeah.
for stainless steel or something.
Yeah. And you want, really heat resistant stuff. You don't want anything that's melting at a low temp is like, yeah, you might throw those ones away. Get something really heat resistant. There's lots of little things, but the main thing is like mixing heat and plastic and then eating it. Those things don't mix. And so we just simply want to kind of like, always prioritize things. And so it's like, okay, let's not heat plastic first of all. And then what else can we do from there? Can we store things differently? Do we have that option? If we don't, what options do we have? So there's always those things as well. So my point is like, there's always more you can understand and learn and like around this. And so one, supporting the adrenals. There's a ton of course, lifestyle things, right, that are sort of slowing this down. I would tell you that I've never had thyroid labs that were technically off, but I for sure have had quite the experience optimizing thyroid and having sluggish thyroid symptoms. I was convinced I was quite ADHD until I started supporting thyroid really in a very targeted way. And I was like, who is this focused on task person? Is like bonkers what happens when you get the right nutrients put together. But what I want to say is that assessment and awareness is always the first step, because I would start to be aware that like, oh, I would lose a little more hair after a week of stress. Oh, my hands would be a little bit colder. I need to put socks on, or I needed to change the heat, or I had trouble regulating my body temperature a little bit after more of a week of stress, right? So if you're seeing those little things, if you have to turn the AC up and down or the heat up and down in the car a lot, there might be something you could improve upon. It doesn't have to be crazy. It's sort of like, what is within my control? What is simple first? Because the reality is one podcast episode isn't going to cut it probably for anyone, and that's okay, right? This is meant to pop open that if you expect that your provider is going to know what to do for you, my plea to you is we are our own best providers often, right? And so there has to be some level of autonomy. You have to start to learn some of it, like, because you got to care more about your body than anybody else, whether we like it or not. So if some of this stuff is coming up, it's like, I want you to know there's so many options from free to paid. You have a lot of opportunities, right? You could look up lifestyle things for adrenal function, and there's definitely some options there, right? And then there's the slow route and the fast route, and then these things stack on each other. But all of it's quite important, and there's always simple, easy, inexpensive things you can do. But we were just talking about hot springs and in general, and minerals still are so key for thyroid. Minerals are going to be a through line no matter what. And so the reason I even thought of the hot springs was because I was thinking about Epsom salt baths, and I was thinking about how few college kids might have a bathtub. And then I was thinking, you live in Utah and hot springs, et cetera. And it's just like, it's fun to think like, oh, what are my options that would actually be fun and health positive, right? And I will also say, like, none of this is meant to be fear mongering. Enjoying your life and like having healthy, positive relationships and laughing and dancing all is incredibly health positive. and sending, like, it's very positive for the immune system overall. I used to be able to quote the exact science on the cascades there, but they're failing me right now. But do not discount the simplicity of those things as well.
So we've been recording for a while, but I kind of wanted to just hit things home with a personal story from you, because like I know that you've got a story about poor adrenal function and metabolism, and you did some things in the name of being healthy, but it ultimately caused hypothyroid symptoms. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. In about 2018, I was working for a health influencer, and we were developing a program. I mean, what was it exactly related to? I mean, she was starting perimenopause, but the premise of the program was it was an intermittent fasting program. And so intermittent fasting was really cool at the time, I would say, and it's still definitely holding strong in some communities, but very cool in 2018 for sure. And I think the really relatable part of the story is that sometimes we do something and we start out with really good intentions. And I always kind of joke, this is the case with vegetarianism. You start out being a vegetarian and you have really good intentions. You're like, oh, I got this and this reason I'm vegetarian. And before you know it, you're just eating buttered noodles at a restaurant. And so you're massively lacking protein, which, by the way, mental health, I got to put the connection together really quick. When you are not intaking adequate protein and you're not digesting it, which stress is the first thing that would degrade protein digestion, you are not getting amino acids from this protein, which make your neurotransmitters. And after a few years, this becomes quite stark for people. People see major changes in their mental health. And you could ask practitioner after practitioner. It's like a very common pattern that we sometimes see when we're in a low protein state overall, whether that's vegetarianism, veganism, or just under eating in general, or just not getting adequate protein, which it should be like at least a gram per kilogram of body weight, or ideal body weight generally, right? All kinds of ways to hash that. Usually like it varies by body size, but typically most people need a minimum of like 75 grams per day, typically. So anyway, back to the fasting scenario, it all starts out with good intentions. And before you know it, you're just having coffee for breakfast and lunch, which is also called undereating. So with fasting, even though there are some benefits around autophagy and programmed cell death and cellular debris cleanup, etc., when kind of done halfway, it's actually just starving the body as well. Right. And so there goes one of my lights.
Oh, you're fine. This is an audio only podcast anyway.
So in general, it is very easy to have good intentions and for things to kind of fall apart. And before you know it, you're undernourishing. And so what I did was I tanked my adrenals. I was completely undernourishing. So very similar to someone who was, training hard, but under eating. I was just skipping breakfast, right? Running on coffee. So I was like starving for lunch. There was a lot of things that were being done halfway, and it resulted in undernourishment, which is really a huge thing. Like a lot of people are undernourished in some way or another. So what it did was it tanked my adrenals, it tanked my thyroid, and I had to kind of crawl out of that hormone decline. I call that my second health crisis overall. But it started out in the name of health, right? It started out like with good intentions, but it didn't quite land that way overall. And I see a lot of people that have had that experience. It's like, and this is common in some respects. Sometimes people will change their diet and initially feel better, but it will end up looking like over restriction or undernourishment. And then there's usually we don't get good coming out of that. Usually the body's going to handle things for a while. And this is going to look like one of those chronic stressors where the body's like, I got by for a while, but I just couldn't do it forever, and it runs out of nutrients. And remember, nutrients make all the magic happen.
Mm-hmm. I have a huge issue with the fact that so many people think vegetarianism is like the healthy ideal. But this was totally me too. I mean, I was vegetarian for 2 years. And looking back, now that I've had nutrition training, I know better, but I look back and I'm like, I was so undernourished. I was not eating enough, and I was definitely not getting enough protein. I was eating dairy, but it just wasn't enough. And my mental health certainly declined, just like you described. And so that definitely is a thing. Like I've got personal experience with that. I've seen other people go through that as well. And you're better off not being vegetarian if you can avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I agree.
a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. So, one thing that I like to ask everybody, if you could change one thing about the way people approach health and wellness, what would it be?
A lot of answers to that question, isn't there? I think for me, always the first thing, I mean, I love to question things. It's like, I want you to know that you're never out of options. And I always think the first thing is awareness around something. So for me, I always recommend people do like a full symptom questionnaire. You can Google multiple symptom questionnaire online, and you can learn that pretty much all of the symptoms on the questionnaire are not necessarily normal. They're just sort of something going on. So when we think about how could we approach health, it's like, could we start to learn the whispers from our body before they're screaming, which takes a lot of attunement, which has a lot to do with mental health and therapy and, not shutting off this innate wisdom that we have, right? It's taken me a long time to come back to that.
Yeah, and sadly, our busy American culture has taught us not to listen to our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do a lot of mindfulness stuff with people, and I always say that. I say, listen to your body. And I mean, toddlers, I think naturally are just mindful. They pay attention to the present moment. They notice if something's going on with their body. But for whatever reason, we're socialized out of it until our therapist says, you need to start doing this again. Or our dietitian says that. But it's a valuable skill. Just pay attention. Your body
I mean,
is
and
speaking.
it's not necessarily, it's like, this is why I love the power of stories and personal stories, because sometimes they help people see something that they couldn't see before. So a story I have kind of related to like being really disconnected to my body, as we come up on holidays, is that I used to say, oh, sitting around food, I just want to like snack on it all the time. And it was very unconscious. And it was really had a lot to do with the rate of my nervous system overall. And so I just share that because it can be relatable. It's like, oh, I'm just sort of unconsciously continuing to eat, and I don't necessarily need to. Like, I'm not being very intentional about it, but just me sort of shutting off attunement to my body and my surroundings and not being very intentional overall. And so little things sometimes can relate to people.
One last question for you, Christa. If somebody wanted to like look you up, read more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, I think you can find pretty much everything you need at my website, which is christabiegler.com. I also have a podcast called The Less Stressed Life, where there's all kinds of nerdy conversations. But on my website, there's all kinds of things. There's a training I just finished that I'm pretty proud of, talking about issues I see in my industry and kind of the solutions for those, and how I would go about trying to resolve symptoms in general, and how to prioritize and to reduce inflammation, et cetera. So, but if you were wanting to learn more about me, you can pretty much find everything from right there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cody.
Real Food Mental Health is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not necessarily agree with all of the views shared by guests. The information presented on this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While I am a healthcare provider, I am not your provider. Always seek the advice of an appropriate healthcare practitioner with any personal questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast. Reliance on information provided by this podcast is at your own risk.